This lecture is on how COVID-19 is spread. So transmission of COVID-19 then goes like this. Viruses are expelled in droplets and aerosols from the airways of infected people when they sneeze, cough, vocalize, or even just when they exhale. So there are basically three ways to be exposed. The first is kind of obvious. Being sneezed or coughed on by an infected person. So that's one way. Another way then is touching a surface, which could be a countertop or it could be their hand, for instance. So touching a surface that an infected person has sneezed or coughed on, and then touching your own nose, mouth, or eyes. And then the third way to do this, to actually get this disease, is by breathing in aerosolized particles. In this case, I mean infectious particles, basically aerosols containing the virus. Which leads us to an important problem regarding the spreading of this disease. So we have the problem of asymptomatic, or in some cases pre-symptomatic. So someone who will develop symptoms but hasn't yet is what we would call pre-symptomatic. So asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic transmission. This is a really important concept. So this is important. And basically, it comes down to this. Infected people can give the disease to others, even if they do not appear to be sick. They may feel sick later, that is to say, they may develop symptoms later. Or they may get a mild case. The problem is that one person with a mild case can nonetheless give that disease to others, and they may get awful cases. They may get fatal cases. So, carrying on from this then, but whether they appear sick or not, they can give the disease to others, and those others then, that's an A, those others may get very sick or die from it. And so then there's a follow-up problem. To this. And it's this. The virus has an incubation period of 2 to 14 days. And this means that people, that is to say people who have contracted the disease, people may be infecting other people and not even know that they have the virus for 14 days. This is why there is so much testing done in places like colleges, because you want to catch people very, very early so that they do not wind up giving the disease to other people. So carrying on with what I was saying there, so carrying on from this then, this virus is very contagious. For every person infected, that person is likely to infect another 2 to 3 people on average. Unless measures are taken to avoid this. And to make things even more complicated, people may also be sick with this but have atypical symptoms. So what I'm going to do now is look at each type of transmission separately. So first type of transmission, then, being sneezed or coughed on. By an infected person. Okay, so here is the first type of transmission. So this is really what is sort of your classic, what is called droplet transmission. And in this case, the virus is contained in a fluid, kind of mucousy droplet. That leaves the infected person's mouth. When they cough or sneeze. And kind of obviously, if these droplets land on your face, nose, mouth, or eyes, or if you inhale these droplets, so if you inhale some, then this is how you become infected. Now, A few things to note about this is that droplets of this type are small, but not microscopic. They travel outward and downward, basically. And the distance that a coughed droplet can travel is about 6 feet. Which means then, if people are more than 6 feet apart, they are less likely to transmit the virus this way. And if all parties, that is to say both the person doing the coughing and the people around that person, if all parties are wearing masks, this also greatly reduces the likelihood of this type of transmission. So the way I like to explain this type of transmission is that these droplets kind of fall the way that if you had a wadded up piece of paper and you threw it directly out from you, it too would kind of travel horizontally for a little while, but it would be subject to gravity and it would fall down. And in the case of these droplets, about as far as they ever get horizontally, at least through coughing, is about 6 feet. So these things basically are subject to gravity. It's kind of standard ballistics. Something goes out, there's a certain amount of air resistance on it, and it falls to Earth. So that is your basic classic droplet transmission. And the thing about wearing masks is that obviously if those droplets are contained within the infected person's mask, they're not going to go as far, like hardly any place. And likewise, if other people are wearing masks, then those droplets are going to be hitting the mask rather than hitting the person's nose and mouth. If their eyes are protected, then those droplets won't get at the eyes either. So that, as I said, is the coughing and sneezing type of transmission, the droplet transmission. This virus does not appear to make people sneeze. So to a large degree, staying 6 feet apart and so on will help to contain, as I said, this droplet transmission. But then there's kind of part 2 of droplet transmission, which is touching a surface. So touching a surface. That an infected droplet has landed on. And then touching your nose, mouth, or eyes. So in this case, what we are discussing is someone who coughs. The droplets fall out of their mouths, but as I said, remember, these droplets fall down. And so if someone is, say, in the supermarket and they cough a bit, and maybe that cough, maybe some of those droplets land on the cereal boxes on that shelf, or maybe they land on the fruit in the produce section. Maybe they land on the surface where the checkout is. The point is the droplets move out a little way and then settle down, and they're not likely to be seen. And so if somebody else comes along and picks up that box of cereal, puts it in their cart, and then touches their nose or mouth or eyes, that is a possible route of transmission. There are other viruses where this is a major route of transmission. This is why we're told to wash our hands so that we don't get colds, so that we don't get the flu and things like that. And so this is why it was thought that this would be a major route of transmission with this disease. It is still possible, but it appears to be something that does not happen that often. But anyway, touching a surface that an infected droplet has landed on. So, as noted in item number 1, which we've already done, infected droplets that are coughed or sneezed out will fall downward. And land on various surfaces. And if your hand touches those surfaces, so if your hand touches those surfaces, and you then touch your nose, mouth, or eyes, then you transmit the virus to yourself. In this way. Now note, since the virus has a lipid envelope, we've discussed this already, since the virus has a lipid envelope, it can be destroyed by any cleaning material that dissolves lipids. Such as good old soap, alcohol, ammonia, and so on. So this is why hand sanitizer that contains alcohol hand washing with soap and disinfection of surfaces became so widespread. As a response to this virus. But this is also why the surfaces that are likely to matter are the ones that are frequently touched. By other people. So in a supermarket, all of those surfaces that people touch could be considered a possible source of contagion. On the other hand, dust under a radiator, where people aren't likely to be touching it anyway, is going to be less of a problem where this disease is concerned. So it is not clear that this particular virus infects people often through this route. This virus is still very new to us. So as I said, we are still finding things out. The surface transmission is very common in quite a few viruses, but it is not clear whether this particular one gets transmitted often that way. Then we're going to get to the one that stymied people for a long time, but appears to be more important than was originally realized, and that is your aerosolized particles. So the third route of transmission, as you recall, then, is breathing in aerosolized particles. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What are aerosolized particles? And basically it's this. The droplets that are expelled during vocalization, that is to say, talking and singing and so on, or through simple exhalation, that is to say, breathing out, are very small. So I'm going to say, to give you an idea, think of the fog that your breath makes on a cold day. There you are seeing briefly the condensation of an aerosol. So when you breathe out, these aerosols get breathed out. And as I said, they don't have the same relationship to gravity that an expelled, a coughed out droplet does. And you've probably seen this on a cold day. You breathe out, you see this fog there, which is the aerosols condensing, basically forming slightly larger droplets, but they hover in the air, and that's your clue. So these now may hover in the air for up to 3 hours. And these tiny hovering droplets, if they contain viruses, and the viruses may be in these tiny, tiny aerosolized particles, but these tiny hovering droplets in this case containing the viruses, it's not necessary to contain a virus to be an aerosol, but in this case, these are aerosolized viruses. So these tiny hovering droplets with the viruses then are called aerosolized particles. So the aerosol is basically those hovering droplets. If those hovering droplets have the virus, then they're aerosolized particles. And then we can be in trouble. So if viruses get into a person's eyes or get inhaled from the air, because there are aerosolized particles in the air, then an infection can begin. So just to reiterate the basic problem here, it goes like this. The problem with aerosols then is they are tiny. They do not behave like larger droplets. They do not simply move outward and down over a short distance. Over a short distance in a short period of time. These, unlike coughed out droplets that are the larger droplets, these then may float in the air for hours. They can spread around in the air and accumulate in the air. And SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, is detectable in aerosols for up to 3 hours. Just to reiterate this. And let's put a star next to this then. Asterisk, there we are. This is why sharing indoor air with other people is dangerous. Aerosols do not disperse readily indoors. The ceilings are much lower than outdoors. The total air volume indoors is much lower, and indoor air doesn't move as much. In fact, I'm going to say it does not move nearly as much. Let's make this very clear. So aerosols then can remain in the air indoors and can accumulate as the people in the room keep exhaling. So they keep accumulating and keep accumulating. I'm going to give you another star here. This is why sharing air with unmasked people is dangerous. Because a mask will catch many particles as they are being exhaled so they never enter the air. where they could infect other people. And this is true both indoors and outdoors. So for another star now, and I'm even going to put this in caps now. So sharing indoor air with unmasked people is particularly dangerous. Especially if people are there. For more than a few minutes. This is what you want to avoid. So, if people go to an event that involves sharing indoor air with many people, over a long period of time, and who do not use masks or do social distancing, this can lead to just one infected person who may not know that they have the disease giving the disease to many others. So when you have this kind of an event, a nice social event, indoors with lots of people, no masks, no distancing, having a party, having a wedding, having a conference, things like that, where people are indoors with one another for a long period of time and talking and drinking and the like for quite a few hours, then you wind up with these sort of perfect conditions for just one infected person, or maybe a couple, but people who do not even know they are infected necessarily, winding up exhaling that virus into the room. It accumulates over time, and many other people can catch the virus that way. So you have here an event where many people may pick up the virus. Then what happens is that those other, I said others here, so those other newly infected people can spread the disease in their communities. So in their communities, and eventually spread the disease further to third, fourth, and fifth-hand recipients. So in this case, you have one event where one infected person showed up. Lots of other people got the virus there, and then those other people gave the virus to their friends, and those friends gave it to other people and gave it to other people, so that you wind up having, as I said, third, fourth, and fifth-hand transmission from that original indoor event, usually indoors. So as I said, when you have this one event where there are lots of people gathered together and one person may infect many, as I said, you can then wind up giving the virus to people who weren't at that event, who don't even know somebody who went to that event, but it winds up working its way through these various different, slightly overlapping circles of communication, circles of friends or circles of work. So events like this are called spreading events. And events that result in hundreds or even thousands of people becoming infected as a result. Either through first-hand transmission, that is to say, being at that event, or through later transmission, these events, where you wind up with one event being sort of the seed event that winds up having hundreds or even thousands of people getting sick with this virus through first-hand transmission or second or third or fourth or fifth-hand transmission. These events then are known as super spreading events. And these can have extensive bad consequences. So our next lecture is actually going to be some examples of super spreading events that have already taken place. But that is the end of this lecture.